All right, here we go. Big news, the Shred the Faith podcast. We're having honest and necessary conversations that you might not be having in your local Sunday morning service. I'm your host, Tech, and we're here with a genuine legend. I am crazy blessed to be sitting here with Brady Shearer. How do I pronounce your last name?
Shearer
of Pro Church Tools, a man that has helped me out a lot. Is actually the reason why I got my job. And Brady, for anybody who's not familiar with you, can you just let the people know what it is that you guys do?
Certainly. Great to be here. Thanks for the kind words. So I run a company called Pro Church Tools. We've been at this for about 7 years now,
Crazy.
and everything we do is helping churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. That's how we like to phrase it. Of course, that's in reference to the printing press, and things are constantly changing. Add a global pandemic on top of that, and it is genuinely wild times. The way that we like to frame it often is to explain, there are 168 hours every single week, and if your Sunday service is on average about one of those hours, that means that you've got 167 hours each week beyond Sunday where you can take the good news of Christ to the people. And, for decades, the majority of our church's efforts have revolved around demanding people come to us, which is great. And those offline, in-person gatherings are so necessary. But now what we have that prior generations didn't is this opportunity to reach people in the 167 hours beyond Sunday through digital platforms because they have so much attention that's being paid to them. And we can set up our spots there for free and take the good news of Christ to where the people are.
One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, this conversation is actually inspired by my arch rival. I won't get into him. My arch rival in the world is John MacArthur. God bless him. He's a Christian. Cannot stand him. But, when we get to heaven, God will have to separate us in our own corners. But, they're having this big, well, they were, I guess they still are having this big thing in California where he was like, where he, you can't sing in California for people who don't know. You can't sing indoors. Actually, in Maryland, you can't sing indoors too. We're having service outside. And so one of the things he said, and again, I have to admit my bias, I'm trying to make sure I'm not misrepresenting what he's saying because of my relationship with him. But what I got from what he said was that us not being able to meet is preventing us from sharing the gospel. And it was this idea that this is oppression. But what that triggered in me, and I've heard that sentiment from a lot of churches, but it's almost like you just said, we have this, it has to come to me, and it's not this outreach. And so you came to mind because what you do in helping churches minister and get this out, more of a true outreach focus, because we always say service doesn't revolve around Sunday, or being a Christian doesn't revolve around Sunday, but everything we do revolves around Sunday service. I think you help people, like you said, with those other days kind of realize, no, you can still share the gospel during this time. And I this is my personal opinion. I'm curious on how your thoughts. I don't think this time has stopped people from sharing the gospel as much as a lack of preparation has. Like not being prepared for that. But I'm just curious on your thoughts about that. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with you because, again, this is something that you help churches navigate, this area of media.
Yeah, a big part of it, I think, is that we prioritize the wrong things in church more often than not. And what I mean by that is that, like I said, for decades, the primary way that we've fulfilled the mission of the church is through these in-person gatherings. And we know, and this is where I would agree with John MacArthur, we know that, to be the church, we have to continue meeting, and that's important. Now, the way that we meet, I think, is flexible, and I think that there is a very narrow model that we mostly find ourselves in within North America, and that I think we should be exploring some other models of church beyond that. And this global pandemic has certainly forced different ministries and churches into different models of exploration. But What's happened is that over the decades, we've come to conflate in-person attendance with fulfillment of mission. Because the things that we deal with in church life are very difficult to quantify, right? We're talking about existential matters. We're talking about life change, discipleship, sanctification, justification. Those things are almost impossible to quantify. And so what we've done is, as substitution for that, we've elevated this metric of in-person attendance as the be-all, end-all number that quantifies if we are or are not reaching and fulfilling our mission. And so the first step to allowing our churches to embrace these 167 hours beyond Sunday is to reframe what truly matters in our churches. And so what we always teach and suggest is to, track in-person attendance, but consider that just one of maybe 20 different, what we like to call next steps. Because at the end of the day, what we want in our churches is active participants, people that are taking action steps towards Christ. And we don't want passive spectators, a bunch of people in church that are just sitting on the sidelines. Maybe they're vocal about their preferences, but they're not exactly getting into the game. We want active participants, and that requires next steps. If we had to define simply what church is meant for, I look to the Great Commission and the greatest commandments, the words of Christ, and that's, go and make disciples, and, love God and love other people. And we will all maybe word it differently with our pithy mission statements and church slogans, but at the end of the day, everything that our churches are doing is in the discipline of helping people to love God, love others, and make disciples. And each of those three stanzas begins with a verb. Something that you must do. It requires action. And so we say, look, church, you've got like maybe 20 different next steps. Almost every church has these 20 different next steps that you need to be tracking. And when you track all of these things holistically, instead of just one in-person attendance, you can start to get a better, more holistic picture of the trajectory of your church. And just to walk through some of these different next steps, we're talking about baptism, we're talking about volunteering, we're talking about giving, we're talking about in-person attendance for services, but also attendance and activity within small groups, events, and then also all of the things that you're doing online, digitally. So this means activity within prayer. And there's about 20, and we have an entire post that outlines this. If you go to nucleus.church/blog, the title of that video and post is The New Rules for Church Growth in a Post-Pandemic World. And in there, we actually have a spreadsheet, just a Google sheet that will allow you to track all of these different next steps. And because, I don't know if you've experienced this, Eric, but for me, I'll post something on Instagram and it'll be a rallying cry for churches and church leaders to start using social to share the good news of Jesus instead of using social to just promote. And everyone gets really excited about that idea, but then eventually, and you serving in a church are probably familiar with this, we get back into our day-to-day ministry, and suddenly someone needs a promo or an email or a social post for this or that, and suddenly our idea of using social to do ministry, it kind of gets taken away from us. And that's because the barometer that we use to measure life change within our churches isn't accurate. It's broken. If attendance is your priority, and we all do it, like we just got to admit it to ourselves first, you're never going to be able to holistically evaluate your church's fulfillment of mission. Swap out your evaluation framework, and now we can actually begin to have serious conversations about using social and digital the right way.
Wow, that's a bar. That is key. Because I agree. I think that is a bad metrics that we track our effectiveness by the amount of people that we can gather together. And now that people
it's
can't
not just
gather,
bad, it's more incomplete, right?
Wow.
Like it on its own, it isn't very helpful. When you track it alongside a bunch of other things, great. So, because I don't want to demonize like church attendance. Sure, I think we've put it into a place of idolatry a bit within North America. But it's something we should definitely be paying attention to. But on its own, it's kind of like the number on the scale. You can lose weight for healthy reasons, you can lose weight for unhealthy reasons.
Gotcha.
And the same goes for gaining weight. So if all you did was look at the number on the scale, you'd basically have no idea if you were moving towards or away from better health within your physical body. Well, the same goes for the body of Christ. That metric on its own, incomplete, isn't actually very helpful in informing us on if we're going in the right direction or not.
Have you seen? I'm curious. Have you seen churches be reluctant to? To me, it seems like sometimes churches are reluctant to market. Sometimes because they maybe marketing feels carnal, or sometimes I've seen where churches may be reluctant to use media to minister because I don't know. It's this weird thing where they just feel like it's not spiritual enough, and so I'm curious if in all the churches that you guys help, is it like a thing of trying to educate them that that social media is not the devil, it is a tool that can be used for good and bad. Have you seen, I guess, resistance to that, or do you think churches are pretty open to it?
I've certainly seen the resistance, and there are a number of different reasons. One that comes to mind is the fact that social media as a construct within culture is still very, very new. Mm-hmm. Even the most established platforms like Facebook are only going to be 15 years old when you think about when they were first made available to the public, really like 2007, so like 13 years old. So really, we've got like a prepubescent teenager when it comes to social media. And so when something is that new in culture, generally it isn't taken as seriously by culture as a whole because it's unusual for something that new to be so pervasive. And that's why I say, look, we're living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years because if you think back to 2005, the following things did not even exist. Google Maps, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Spotify, Dropbox, Uber, Airbnb. Crazy. None of those things even existed. Netflix existed, but they were making you rent DVDs at the time. Yeah. And so not in their current forms. And now you think about our everyday lives and trying to imagine going through a single day, let alone a week, without those tools. Well, that's just not my everyday experience whatsoever. And so for something that colossal to take place so fast is unusual. Then you got to consider that the average lead pastor in a Protestant church in North America is in their upper 50s.
Right.
So if you consider their experience, they have been ministering in church now for decades. And for the vast majority of their leadership, they never had to consider or contend with digital platforms. And now they've got younger people like us coming to them and saying, you need to take this seriously. That's a very difficult pill to swallow because it never existed and now suddenly it's the most important thing. But that's the pace of change that we're living through as a culture. And this is happening in every single industry. So we can just look beyond the church world to kind of see what might be on the horizon for a lot of our churches. Back in around 2005, Netflix went to Blockbuster and they said, hey, would you consider acquiring us? This is Netflix asking Blockbuster to acquire them.
Crazy.
And that was because they just were in a tough financial place and Blockbuster was at the top of the game right then. Blockbuster kind of laughed them out of the door and said, yeah, we don't see any reason to bring your services into our experience. We're killing it. We don't need you. And then within the matter of a couple of years, Blockbuster is extinct and Netflix is, one of the biggest media companies in the history of humankind. That happened in less than a decade. That is entirely unusual if you think about the scope of American history, if you think about the scope of human history, for something to happen that quickly. And this also brings into the picture a lot of what we're seeing with deconstruction of faith with younger people, of different faith ideologies that are suddenly confronting maybe what you grew up with. Because it used to be that you would spend your formative years as a Christian, 20 and under, in your tight-knit faith community. And then maybe you'd move to the big city for college, or you'd move, to get a job once you hit your early 20s. And it's at that point that you would be exposed to a ton of new worldviews. And I remember when I went off to college, Eric, I was given a book by my youth pastor, and it was like, How to Stay Christian Through College. Now, mind you, I went to a Bible college, and he still felt the need to give me this book because that was kind of the accepted paradigm. You go off to college, and suddenly all these people that think differently than you. Yeah. Exactly. Well, now you don't have to wait until college. You just have to open your phone.
Wow.
And we think about students nowadays that are so active on TikTok. For them, social isn't so much a platform to be active on. It's recreation. It's their life. You know, me growing up, my friends and I would go play basketball. We would go play music. We're in a band. Well, nowadays, I think what we would be doing is like trying to create a viral TikTok to see which one of us could, you know, get 100,000 views on our next video. And so, again, the rate of change has happened so quickly. To answer your question, this is why the resistance exists. And it's not just in the church world. It's in pretty much every industry. And the more bureaucratic or traditional the industry is, the harder it is to see change. So we see this in education. We see it in healthcare. We see it in the financial industries. You know, I was, this morning is the first. We're recording this on the first of the month. So on the first of the month, I do a bunch of my budget stuff. So I was logging into, you know, my retirement savings, and I was just making sure that everything was set up correctly. All of that is done by myself through an online platform that requires no financial advisor and allows me to do everything digitally. And what's amazing about that is that, you know, the fees are, let's say, like 0.0 something percent versus 1 or 2%, because I don't have a real human helping me with this anymore. Well, that would have been unheard of 10 years ago. So it's every industry. And this is where senior leadership is such an advantage at churches. If your senior leaders are humble enough to say, look, I don't have all the answers because I haven't grown up with this and I haven't been leading through this for decades, and they're able to find people that can help them, where they're still the ones that are leading with the vision of the church, and they're taking that timeless message, and what we say is take the timeless message and share it through timely mediums. If you have a senior leader and senior leadership like that, then you are very, very fortunate, because it is not, I would say, especially normal.
Yeah, it's crazy at times. It's always been weird to me to see these big $1 million churches, and then and maybe I'm biased because I do video, but their camera stuff is trash. It's like you have this huge cathedral and there's no production. And like you said, people use social media for recreation. It's our phones are the last thing we put down when we go to bed, the first thing that we pick up. It would seem like as Christians that we would be more invested into ministering and outreaching in those areas. But there is some reluctancy. In this pandemic, what have you seen? Have you feel like this has revealed anything in particular about churches and Christians in general and their preparedness, I guess, to minister through social media?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic is an accelerator. The pandemic is an exaggerator. So basically, whatever trajectory you were on, you're now going in that direction a lot faster than you were before. And then whatever culture and strengths, weaknesses existed prior to the pandemic, those are now being seen, a lot greater. So, even in my own organization, our strengths have become a lot clearer, but also our weaknesses have become a lot clearer. And I've seen that like in my own health, because and when I say health, I mean, physical health, but spiritual health, mental health, relational health. I think what the pandemic does is it basically adds a bunch of extra weight onto the existing frameworks and systems and rhythms that your church already had. And so if there was a rhythm within your church that was getting by, but wasn't particularly strong, perhaps wasn't particularly thought through, there wasn't a strong vision behind why it existed or how it was meant to exist, this pandemic might be kind of the last straw on the proverbial camel's back that breaks it, because, it just can't withstand that added weight. It was barely getting by before.
Wow. Crazy. I kind of want to shift gears, because I think there's one of the things that I think happened, there's an aspect with churches, but also Christian creatives in general. And I was curious your thoughts on this, because I think, like I said, I've been watching you guys for a while, and the quality and the effort in which you guys put into your stuff is amazing. And I'm curious, and this is just random and trolly, please forgive me. Why is Christian stuff so bad? I feel like there is something about quality that makes Christians feel like excellence is not of God. Like excellence will cost you your ministry. And I think, like, even going back with social media, the good thing about it is anybody could put something up, But because anybody can put something up, there's so much competition. So yes, you have a live stream up for your church. Yes, your church is doing videos, but people could turn. People could just switch the channel. They don't have to watch your church. I'm a Christian. I love God with all my heart. I've just spent the last 3 weeks watching all 6 episodes of The Shield. Greatest show in the world. I should have probably been watching some Christian television show, but it's so bad that I just can't get through it. I'm curious if you think, and why do you think Christian stuff is bad? But I guess, why do you think that as Christians we have some type of hesitancy to do things with excellence? Like it would just like, I see it a lot in worship too, where people are like, it doesn't matter as long as you sing to God with a pure heart. It's like, no, if you got lights, smoke, and camera on you, you're up there to give something. You got to at least be in key. So I'm just curious if you have found or seen like a disconnect with Christians and excellence.
I think it depends kind of what tradition you come from, because I have been serving in churches, definitely, where the, quote unquote, the move of the Spirit or just the presence of God takes such priority that it doesn't matter if there's any order or any excellence whatsoever, which to me feels like a place of imbalance. But then I've been in other churches where, we've made excellence almost an idol because we've just wanted to like have the absolute best of the best of the best, so much so that there have been times where we've prioritized that over people. And so that would also be a place of imbalance. And so I think there is like a healthy balance where you're always striving to create something that is excellent, because what I like to say is like the stakes are extremely high, and there are heaven and earth consequences to what you and I do in our ministries. And I always like to frame it in a way where I compare it to the preacher, because we don't always treat things, I don't know if you've experienced this, we don't treat things evenly or equally. There's a lack of congruency a lot of the time. So here's an example. If I said to you, it doesn't matter if the pastor's theology is correct or not. They're trying, like they have a good heart.
Right.
Most people would be like, no, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
But if I said, it doesn't matter if that person can actually keep their subject in focus with the camera. It doesn't matter if they can actually understand color theory or setting a proper white balance. They're trying. A lot more people would say, correct. And so not to say that theology and white balance are perfect comparisons, but in every single discipline, there are, 2 things to keep in mind. There's your spirit and the attitude of which you're serving and your connection to God. And that's very individual, it's very personal, but it's also very important for what we do. And then on the other side is, being a student of your own discipline. If you are an excellent communicator or preacher, you're always looking for ways to improve upon that so that more people can hear the good news of Jesus with fewer hurdles, right? Because if you are a poor communicator in the sense that you say a lot and you stutter a lot, not because you have a speech impediment, but because you're just not polished, well, that can become a distraction or a hurdle to someone actually listening to you. So you would want to work through that so that you would not be the cause, the hurdle to people hearing the good news. The same would be true of, let's say, putting together a video, putting together a worship set. If you're singing out of key, if you're singing off tune, it can be difficult for people to engage with worship because you are becoming a distraction. And so I think it just comes down to like mission and vision. Basically, everything we've talked about so far is tradition versus mission. And I've found in my experience with churches that we tend to elevate tradition over mission very, very frequently. Meaning the idol of we've always done it this way, the idol of, well, this is how we do it at our church, takes precedent over the mission. Because if our mission is to, again, help people to love God, love others, and make disciples, then our highest priority should be effectiveness as it pertains to that mission, not our own familiarity, not our own comfort, like not what makes me as the communicator feel good. No, it shouldn't be about me at all. It should be about effectiveness, to our mission, helping people to love God, love others, and make disciples. And so if you have a senior leader that can cast that vision and say, look, I understand that we've always done it this way, but if we have reasonable doubt that it is no longer the most effective option, then it is incumbent upon us as leaders, it is our duty and responsibility to find a different method, because effectiveness is our highest goal.
Crazy. And Brady, I'm glad you're far away so you can't smack me in the face. Okay, I'm about to blaspheme. Just tell me if I'm blaspheming. I'm trying to say this the right way. I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. I believe the Bible is true, from God, everything, all of the above. I think, and this is my opinion, I feel like the compiling of Scripture has frozen us in time when it comes to ministering the gospel. Because, and you'll often hear people say, we need to go back, we need to be like the Acts church. I feel like they used what they had to their in their reach. What they did whatever they could do. I believe in miracles and everything, but also when Jesus says, the things that I do, you will be able to do greater, I think about Twitter with that. Like, I think Paul would love to be able to preach a message, and that message gets live streamed all across the world and then live on the internet forever. 10 years down the line, people could go and still hear Paul's message. And I think somehow, like when you mention tradition overtaking the mission, I think we as Christians have kind of gotten frozen in time to where it's like, no, we need to, instead of taking the principles that are there, we want to take the look. We want to look like the Acts Church and feel, because it makes us feel deep and spiritual. But, I think if Netflix came to the church, and if the church was Blockbuster, I think the church would be like, nah. And when they would miss that, they would miss that influence. Seth Godin has a book called The Purple Cow. And I don't know how many people have read it, but the basic premise of the book is, if you're driving down a long road, and maybe if you grew up in the city, like me, you see a cow for the first time, you'll be like, wow, that's incredible, a cow. But the more you continue to drive down that road and you continue to see cows, it won't be as impressive until or unless you saw a purple cow. Because what was once new has become so familiar. Slightly trying not to blaspheme, I feel that way about the gospel. When it first came, no one had ever experienced or heard anything like the gospel, like what Jesus was saying, like what the disciples were saying. But now we have 2,000 years plus of people saying this in every which way they can think of. And I don't think the message changes at all. I do think as Christians, we need to be more creative with the method. How do I, without changing the message of the gospel, purple cow it? Because you got to get people's attention. And I'm curious your thoughts. I'm not sure if you heard about TBN for the first time.
The network?
Yeah, the TBN. I guess what they did recently, they are for the first time, I guess, in 40 years, they're not canceling Kenneth Copeland, but they're taking Kenneth Copeland off the air, and they're like,
I did see that, yeah,
replacing them with Stephen Furtick, which is cool, great. But I used to watch TBN all the time. Don't watch it anymore, and I was thinking like, what TBN could do to get Christians to watch it again. I think some people watch it.
I mean, TBN's a great example of this huge challenge that so many of our churches face. And that is that the people who are paying the bills and supporting us are very quickly not becoming the majority voice in culture. So if you're TBN, you have to consider your loyal patrons that have been watching forever. And generally, those are going to be the types of people that are perhaps older and prefer the way that things used to be, because that, during some of their best years of life, TBN was a huge part of it. And so they don't want to see one of their favorite preachers, and perhaps not Copeland, one of their favorite preachers replaced, because to them it's like, well, this is why I like you, TBN. If I wanted to see Furtick, I could go on to YouTube. But then if you're TBN's leadership, and again, this is emblematic of virtually every church because the majority of our churches are older. If you're TBN's leadership, you've got to think, okay, if we're going to get someone like Eric to come back and watch, we need someone that he relates to more. So it's a risk because to reach the next generation, you kind of have to like ostracize your existing base. And there's a great book called Growing Young that talks about this. And the paradox is that so many of the most vibrant churches, they emphasize younger people because they know that younger people are the heartbeat of culture, they're the heartbeat of a church. And when you have a vibrant church that is full of young people, every other generation wants to be a part of that. And so strategically, you can focus on, the teenagers, the 20s, the 30s, and when you focus on that, the 40s and the 50s and the 60s kind of come with it. And, that's the strategic paradox. But to go back to what you said about, being stuck in tradition, I think that, the gospel is always going to be countercultural. And it's always going to be, in my mind, a purple cow because the message is you have to die to yourself if you want to experience life. And there is not a single person with a human nature that is naturally disposed to that. Right. We are selfish. We want to look out for our own.
For sure.
We do not necessarily want to kill ourselves daily, but that is the call of Christ. So that's always going to be completely upside down kingdom wild. But I think that Jesus set a very good example for us on how to use, the worldly ideas that are accessible to everyday people and help that to share the kingdom of God. Here's what I mean. So frequently, when Jesus is teaching, he reaches for a worldly idea of his time that the everyday person would understand. So he talks about agriculture or economics or labor or wine, food, baking, and then he uses that to explain the kingdom of God. So what he does is he finds the intersection between faith and culture to make the gospel accessible to every single person. We have accounts in the Gospels where the disciples who are spending so much time with Jesus are still kind of being like, okay, but what does this actually mean? Because, the existential matters of the kingdom of God are sometimes difficult. To make them accessible, you talk about a woman who lost a coin. You talk about the prodigal son who returns. You talk about the parable of the talents. And now it starts to put the pieces together for the everyday person. And so I think that model is still the best model that we can have today, finding the intersection between faith and culture and using those intersecting points to create places where the gospel becomes accessible to every single person. And that, again, transcends tradition because what is an accessible idea today is different than it was in 2000. And so if your mission is to communicate like Jesus did, well, then that transcends generations and it transcends, times and places, and it becomes something that can evolve with the changing of the times. Again, timeless message, timely mediums.
Right, deep. That's very true. And I want to get this off my chest about TBN because I don't have beef with TBN. But to me, if I was TBN, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, I would call a Brady. I mean, how effective would it be if TBN had a show like Pro Church Tools on their network? But it's like we only think about sermons. We only think about, like, I've never seen a Christian sitcom or something. Or you know what I mean? Or, well, maybe. No, not that. I don't know, maybe. But, I've never really seen one. Why wouldn't I call, if I was TBN, why wouldn't I call a Kev on stage and try to get him a platform on the channel to bring in these people? But I think there's something, like you said, I think about Christians that just keep us in tradition and not being able to think outside the box. So I just wanted to say that in case this ever reaches TBN, they need to call Brady.
Well, maybe, but I mean, I think that's a good example of like a platform that's stuck in the middle of a massive communication shift. Let's use Kevin on stage as an example. Well, he can reach his fans and audience directly through YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. What does TBN have to offer him? Because it used to be TBN could say, we have this massive reach.
Yeah, that's
People
true.
come to me all the time and say, hey, you should use our email list and you can reach all of these pastors. And I say, I can already reach all those pastors
Right. That's right.
because there's more of them on Facebook than on your email list.
Right.
And I'm not trying to be unkind, and I always do it in
I
a
got you.
charitable manner. At least I try my best. But that's where you're in a tough position. TBN's like, well, we have all these people, these Christians. I was like, well, YouTube has more of them. And if I go directly to them and I cut out you, the middleman woman TBN, then suddenly my financial interests are also taken care of, and I get to have creative control.
Right.
So unless TBN is rolling up with a dump truck of money to say, you can't fund your own show like we can, here is this X amount of million to take a creative idea that you have and bring it to life in a way that you never could, there are very few points of leverage that a platform like TBN would have. Any of these traditional media companies, they're all struggling to figure this out because big organizations, individuals can go direct to consumer now.
Gotcha. Crazy. And this is the last road I want to kind of go down to kind of help add value because, and this is the God honest truth. When I look at you, and we touched on a little bit, I see a person who's overcome resistance. For people who don't know, Stephen Pressfield wrote, for me, which was a life-changing book, but I'm still lazy, so I don't know how life-changing it could be, but it was a very deep book, The War of Art, and he talks about resistance, and he very poetically defines resistance, but resistance is basically everything that keeps you lazy, keeps you from doing what it is that is on your heart to do, what it is that you feel called to do. And so I'm curious about how you overcame resistance. And then following you for a while, I've seen these different changes in your presentation, like on YouTube. Like I remember Ask Brady, and even before that, when it was just you in the background and y'all had that little square that would come up. Like how for the Christian creators out there, how did you find your voice? What was that journey like for you to find your voice on YouTube or just in general?
Sure. So it comes down to your values, I think. The reason I've been consistent over close to a decade with content, never having a prolonged period of absence where I'm not publishing, is because I have this fundamental belief that long-term progress, growth, success on social and digital platforms requires you to be showing up consistently. So churches ask me, how can we make a difference and affect life change on social media? And I say, publish content that your audience likes for 10 years. And then the question is, well, why 10 years? Well, I don't know, because it's a long time.
Right.
10 years is a really long time. Maybe it's 7 years, maybe it's 8 years. But the point is that, when we're building relationships in real life, if you want a relationship to really count for something, it's got to exist for a long time. I'm about to turn 30 next year, and I am eternally grateful that my closest friends I met at the very earliest of my 20s, or we were friends in high school. Outside this door in the office where the rest of my team is working, the majority of them I went to youth group with, and we're still friends. So now we're all 30, and we've been friends for half of our lives. And the reason our relationships are so deep is because we just are still here. And the reason that I've been able to build an audience with Pro Church Tools is because I keep showing up and I keep trying to provide value to the people on the other side of the computer screen, other side of the phone screen. But then, of course, that's just one value. My another value is that I always want to be getting better. I look at the video I just published and I'm like, okay, what can we do to improve the next one? What's a small iteration? What's one more creative technique that we can try that we weren't comfortable trying last time? Because we're never going to feel comfortable unless we truly confront it. And not getting kind of stuck in routine or doing the same thing perpetually. And the tough thing about social and digital is that there are these very, very obvious metrics. It's like, if every single thing that you did, you had dunk contest challenging, voters. What am I looking for? Judges holding up the score. Every time you do something, they hold up a score and be like, this is how good I deem your efforts. So for example, I published a YouTube video this morning. I published a social media post this morning. 2 different pieces, nothing to do with the other. And I was so proud of each of them. I log in 3 hours later to Instagram's insights and to YouTube Studio's analytics, and they're both like, well, your audience didn't really like these compared to what you published last time. And you can look at that and you can be like, man, that is frustrating. And there's an element that it is frustrating, and I wouldn't want to pretend that it's not, because I felt like I'm so proud of that piece of art, and it doesn't seem like people are resonating with it as much as I'd hope. And that can become paralyzing, where you're like, you know what, it's just not worth it. I'm not going to keep publishing, especially when you're just getting started. It becomes even more difficult. But I'm here to say, like, you know, tens of thousands of people online, you know, as like a medium-sized platform, medium-sized creator, it doesn't get easier when you publish something you think is great and people aren't exactly excited about it. And so the balance there in a digital world is creating content that you know your audience will resonate with, and then balancing that with creating content you're not sure they'll resonate with, but you know is important for them. And if all you did was give them the content they want, then you wouldn't be a very good leader. And if all you did was create content that they need, but they're not particularly excited about, you wouldn't be a great leader because no one would know who you are. And the leadership analogy here is that you always want to be one step ahead, but you can't be 2 steps ahead. You're 2 steps ahead, no one can follow you. You're 1 step ahead, you're just leading enough for people to follow along and be able to keep up.
It's interesting because a lot of creatives tend to get in their head. I remember I was just having this conversation with someone. I remember saying, man, all I need is some lights, and then I'm going to get this YouTube thing cracking. And then I'm like, you know what? No, I need cameras. If I get cameras, I would get this YouTube thing cracking. I've got everything that I needed. I mean, I work at a church, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's still me. You know what I mean? I think we sometimes feel like if I just had, then I would be able to. But it's this idea of, no, you got to use what you got now. Think about like the parable of the talents. The guy who was in trouble with his master, I thought it was an interesting response. He says to his master, I was fearful. His master says to him, no, you were lazy. And so I have all these things and insecurities that I may tell myself are the reasons why, but you still gotta work through it. There's nothing around it. So I'm curious, what was the most difficult thing for you with remaining consistent and getting where you are and where you're going?
Yeah, and I like what you're saying. I call that gear gluttony, and it doesn't go away.
Gear gluttony is a real thing.
Just last week, you know, I'm looking at a mic right here above me, and it's a $1,000 mic. And last week, I was like, this mic, it's unusable. I need a $1,500 mic. What's crazy is there's a $2,500 mic in my audio cabinet, and I'm like, this one, I don't like this one. So it's like, it never, like, you know, I have a $25,000 camera. It's like my favorite camera, but still some days I'm like, if only you could do this. Like, it never changes. So if you let that be a stumbling block for you, it's going to happen when you're trying to upgrade from your iPhone to your first like real camera. It'll be a stumbling block when you have a, you know, $50,000 camera, but it's not a $60,000 camera. Like, whatever it is, the principle will remain with you. So biggest thing for me has been creating systems that allow me to create consistently. So an example could be batch recording, where you record 2, 3, 4 videos in one sitting so that you can edit and not have to like set up all your lights again. So right after we're done here, I'm going to record 3 Instagram Reels because I'm really into Instagram Reels right now. Seems like a huge opportunity here in August, September 2020. And so I'm going to record 3, and then those will exist for the next week. And then next week I'll record 3 again. So instead of recording 1 each time, you batch produce. So that way, you know, you can get ahead of your inspiration. The other part is understanding when you're most creative and then protecting that time at all costs. So for me, my best creative time is usually 7 a.m. till 11 a.m. I feel like a superhero creative in those 4 hours. You start talking to me at 1, 2, 3 p.m., I might be useless. So what I do is I plan my interviews like this one in the afternoon because I know once I start dialoguing with somebody else, well, now I can get those creative juices flowing. But if I'm left to myself in front of a computer, I'll just jump on social and start getting distracted. But 7 a.m. till 11 a.m., that's when I'm in my zone. Like nothing can touch me then. So I protect that time. I don't schedule meetings then. I make sure like that is my time to work and be creative because that's when I'm at my best. So those are just two things, but all of them, like the underlying theme with both of those anyway, is they're systematic. So what happens is you stack all of these things on top of each other, and suddenly you're stacking the deck in your favor to be more creative for the long term. The word I always use when encouraging churches with their creativity is sustainability. Look at what you're doing right now and ask yourself, is this sustainable? Because if you can't honestly say yes, again, success on social and digital is long-term effort. So if what you're doing now isn't sustainable, you might as well just stop because there's literally no fruit to gain here. Because you could gain 100,000 followers in a month. If you're not able to sustain that over the long term, in a year, that'll all be gone. And we've seen this with viral things, things that go viral and like they get, they amass huge followings, but then maybe the virality was based off of a single thing. It's a one-trick pony, or it was based off of something that was incredibly timely but couldn't exist for a long term, and then eventually it just fizzles out. So sustainability, finding ways to show up every single week, and then also everyone listening to this has my permission to focus on fewer platforms and to post less. I used to publish up to 3, 4, 5 times, 6 times a week on YouTube. Now I publish once a week because that was not sustainable beyond that individual season of time. So now I publish once a week, but the quality of that one video is now 10 times, 20 times what those videos were when we were doing 6 times a week. And so not only am I sustainable, making sure that I'm not just going to disappear from YouTube for long-term periods and thus stall out all of the momentum that I've accumulated, but the quality is also better. And in a saturated world of social that it is now, and it's way more saturated thanks to the pandemic, you have to be giving your best. So if all you're going to do is publish once per week on Insta, once per week on YouTube, you're like, I know I can do this sustainably, that's okay. Because if you want to break through today, Q4, Q3 of 2020, you've got to give it your best.
Wow, that's good. All right, last question, because you're changing my life right now, okay? I think we talk about gear gluttony, which I think is an amazing term. I'm going to call someone a gear glutton the first moment I get a chance. There is this knowledge, there is this thing that I think sometimes creative and Christians do, creatives do in general, and that is hiding behind research and knowledge. And it's something that I've been guilty of it. They'll watch Brady videos. They'll watch, what's your man, Gary V. They'll watch all these videos. And sometimes when you watch all that information on a specific topic, it can make you feel like you're doing something without actually doing something. So you can watch all the videos on marketing and you can have this, and I think this is how we end up with so many coaches, but not that many players. You have all this knowledge of what to do because maybe you've been reading and watching videos or whatever for a point in time, but you have yet to jump. You have yet to take that mark. What would you say to people who maybe are even watching your stuff or looking up to you or anyone that are stuck in this hiding, but I don't know what to call it, but hiding behind research? Only if I knew more than I could type of mentality.
So there are certain disciplines and pursuits where you need to have the right research. Social media is a lot like getting in the gym. You can study about deadlifts in the correct form. You'll never be able to properly do a deadlift until you actually pick up that bar and feel how the weight is interacting with your stance and with the way that your legs are driving into the ground. You can't learn how to do that right and thus get stronger and add more weight to the bar until you're actually doing it. So, 3 cliches come to mind. One, you mentioned Gary V. He always says, you need to be a practitioner. You got to actually be doing the work in the trenches. My friend Sean, he always says your first videos are going to be your worst videos. So you can't get through that unless you start making your worst videos. You have to do it. And you mentioned, some of my earliest videos. My chin is always pointed up to the sky because I didn't know how to interact with the camera yet. Why? I don't know, but it was my first videos. There were going to be things wrong about them. And then third, I don't know who said this, but, the only way to get to it is to go through it. Just meaning you can't research your way around those feelings, and you can't research your way out of that place. The only way to get through it is to actually do the creative work and to hit publish. And again, my friend Sean, he redid his YouTube intro, and now all it says in the intro is you just got to hit record. He's putting that in the intro because he has now counseled, coached, mentored thousands of YouTube creators, and the biggest thing that's in their way is always, I just don't know if I'm ready yet. I just don't know if this is good enough. It's the biggest hurdle, and it robs the world of your voice. And, the world doesn't need another Brady. My God, we don't need another Brady. We need more people that are their voice.
Right,
and this is why I always try to stay in my lane and not be someone I'm not, because it's easy for all of us to look up to these big names. Oh man, they have this amount of followers. If I was more like them, then I could get that many followers. If I had that camera, I could create videos like that, and I would have that type of reach. But it's not true. Their impact is because of their voice and a confluence of different factors. It's not because of how they dress, the camera they use. And if you copy their style, it's going to be disingenuous and it won't work for you, because the world doesn't need another them. The world needs you.
Wow. That is a blessing. That's powerful. How can people come along and assist in what you guys are doing over at Pro Church Tools?
Sure. 2 best places to get connected with us are YouTube and Instagram. Just search my name, Brady Shearer, on YouTube. Hit subscribe. And Brady Shearer on Instagram. Follow along. Shearer. It is a biblical term. It's one who shears sheep. Okay,
Amen.
So you gotta shear the sheep. We are the shearers. Brady Shearer on both of those platforms.
Hey man, I appreciate you coming through. This has been a blessing. Very, very insightful. Dropping jewels, okay? Pastor Brady in the building. I really, really appreciate you, brother. All right, you guys, I hope you guys are blessed. This has been an awesome conversation to Trust the Faith Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Listen, my YouTube game is absolutely trash. It's a disgrace. I am ashamed, okay? I need to change my life. Today is the day that I got saved. I'm changing my life. I am fully... I'm ashamed. I should be ashamed, Brady. I'm sorry. All right, I'm coming to Christ. Okay, so listen,
Today's your day. Today's
my day. Today's our day. But I'm coming to the altar. If you're in YouTube world, subscribe. Every week is happening. That's gonna be my commitment. Dropping a video.
Turn on notifications. Keep this man accountable.
Amen. Keep me accountable. I'm ashamed. But you guys be blessed. This has been a blessing. The Trust the Faith Podcast, and we are out.